and we'll open up for the PowerPoints. Sound good, everybody? Ready to get started? I know there's a lot going on in the world. We got to get back to Twitter and make sure we know what's going on. So anyway, so today's discussion is going to be on the use case of DigiByte as a method of payment. And this talk today is going to be really kind of a macro discussion. We're trying not to get too granular with it, but give it some context, some deeper meaning for us as people who use DigiByte and support the network. But I am really glad today we've got Patrick Harris. He's one of our advisors to the Alliance and on the education committee. And I'd like to have Patrick say a little bit about his background, because he's really got some interesting perspective for us to be able to pick his brain on. So Patrick, why don't you give people a little bit more about your background as it pertains to this?
Okay. Well, for many years, I worked in digital identity and customer onboarding on a global for a global platform called Worldview. Very focused on the compliance side, so AML, fifth, sixth anti-money laundering directives, and helping partners or issuers vet their risk along with customer onboarding, as well as ensuring that that it was a seamless onboarding process. So that's kind of my background. But I spent several years working at MasterCard. So and through MasterCard, and my thing was primarily on. We're going to talk a lot today on when we talk about merchants and the consumer side of things. But I spent a lot of time on building up on a global scale, which we'll kind of touch on today, our value-added services to facilitate B2B transactions across MasterCard's rails. So particularly in large market, which I'll touch on a little bit today, but providing services, whether these are consulting services or they were like APIs to enable commercial transactions. And a big part of that was vendor or supplier acceptance. So kind of transitioning a little bit today, what we'll talk about is kind of some of the network plays around what I did at MasterCard and how that applies to kind of like crypto acceptance and a kind of a global perspective. So Laura, I might have said too much on that, but I was just kind of giving a background on a little bit of my worldview.
No, that's perfect. And I think it gives some good foundational context to what we're going to be talking about today and why you have certain viewpoints that you do. We have that discussion. And then next up, Leroy from DGBcommerce. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about really specifically, kind of how you came about to DGBcommerce and a little bit about your background of why that's an area that you're interested in pursuing and building.
Yeah, so I'm Leroy Gerrits. Some people know me as Cryptos Go Burr or LG. I've been a web developer for, I think professionally for 17 years by now, even longer when I count my hobby years. I've been involved in many e-commerce projects, big web shops, big Dutch ones. Some of the biggest five Dutch web shops have some of my architecture implemented. Been doing it for a long time. Being a software developer speaks for itself that I also ended up with cryptocurrencies at some point. I think it was Bitcoin almost 10 years ago at this point, and DigiByte early 2015. Always been slightly involved with DigiByte, so I've actually participated with writing up exchanges earlier to get DigiByte listed. Some of you may know me as a notorious critic for the past couple of years. I have some specific views on that, but more on that later. But one of my pet peeves with DigiByte is it's a great payment method. It's a great peer-to-peer payment means of payment from merchants to consumers or other way around. What always bugged me is that not many people are using it yet, even though it's cheap, it's fast. And I think some of the causes of that is that the user friendliness in the section just isn't there yet. the ease of transferring a DigiByte payment from one model to the other is there for the tech savvy people, but that's just peer to peer. There's no automation involved. And having made a lot of web shops in the past, I thought it would be a great idea to finally put things to action and create a DGBcommerce. So people can actually create a shop online, just like you can on Amazon or any other marketplace platform, and enable automated payments for consumers. And that's DGBcommerce in a nutshell.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, we've got I'm excited for this talk today because we do have such a wide range of kind of perspective and skill sets. So I think it's going to really add to the richness of what we're learning. And then Ryan from Oxapay. Ryan, do you mind just quickly introducing yourself as well and your role in Oxapay and what Oxapay is?
Hello, everyone, and hello, Laura. Thank you for having me here, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, Leroy. Thank you for your amazing, actually, points about the DigiByte and the crypto industry. And I actually agree with Leroy about the consumers that they can use crypto more than now, actually. So the actually we have to put up everything that everything shows like um, perfectly in people come to know about DigiByte and they use it and they understand how it functions it and actually understand about the blockchain. It's amazing that they come to know about the payments, about how payments work out and how the payment industry is working and how it's boosting. And I totally agree. It needs to be known. Everybody needs to know about these things, and uh, I think there's a long way to go. And I totally agree with all of you guys, especially Leroy, which he mentioned about the Amazon and shop onlines, and these are actually fantastic solutions, which I think more people will come to know about it. And if there is anything else, I'll be glad to answer any of you. And thank you, Laura. Thank you, everyone.
Great. And what's your role for Oxapay, Ryan? Just to give
Oh,
people
sorry,
an idea of.
sorry, I forgot to mention I'm a PR of Oxa, and it's supposed to Sarah, which is the business development of our platform, supposed to be here, but in some convenient meetings happen for her. So it's an apologize from Oxapay. I'm representing here as Sarah. And
Okay, gotcha.
yes, Laura.
All right. Well, thanks. Thanks for introducing everybody. And I'm Laura Taylor. Most of you know me. Do not have a history with e-commerce or payments, but my background is in education. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we can go ahead and get started with their discussion today. All right. So, like I said earlier, this is going to be really primarily focused around DigiBytes as a payment use case. So we're going to have some, these general learning objectives. Are you guys seeing my PowerPoint okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So, like I said, this is going to be more of a macro view of the discussion today. We've gone through a couple of iterations of this, and we had kind of gotten a little too granular. And so you'll notice that this does not give this is not like a how-to step 1, step 2, but more of that broader discussion. And really, I think important part of that is to define the term acceptance. I think we say it, but we don't really understand what that means. And Patrick has some really good. He's got some really good background on this that he's going to share when we get to that. just explain the general idea of what is a point of sale system. I think we all interact with them one pretty much every day, so we have a general idea, but just kind of put that in the scope, and then being able to identify those challenges. I think as stated earlier, there's plenty of challenges. The user friendliness really is a huge barrier, and discuss that in a little bit more detail. Then we want to wrap it up on a high note, and we want to assess why could this be a good thing for businesses. And there's definitely now, I think, more every day we're seeing with the banking industry, with the payment industry, that having a parallel system that can work in synergy is going to be really important for us moving forward. So really talking in more depth about those benefits and in the context in which they lay. So let's start with acceptance. And really, what acceptance means is, you, can that business allow for that specific currency? But it has a kind of that broader aspect of, it legitimizes that currency. If you can buy services or goods, that it recognizes that currency is a valid form of payment. There's a acceptance is not just, can I buy my coffee with this thing, but what does that mean in a broader scope? That legitimizes whatever it is you're paying with. And Patrick, do you want to go a little bit more into depth of that from your perspective from MasterCard?
I mean, that I think just anything that, if you're talking about expanding acceptance, a lot of times companies will refer to this as their footprint. So in parallel, we talk a lot about the node crawler in DigiByte world, right? How many nodes, how many actually different types of nodes and activity that's going across the network. Similar things to an acceptance. So like as an issuer, right, as DigiByte is in its own way, if I'm actually issuing some sort of currency or some sort of payment method, I want to be able to measure over time that my footprint is expanding, right? Whether it's in a lot of times in payments, we think about it as a regional or an in-country perspective, right? So places like MasterCard are measuring their acceptance footprint, right? This is what they're reporting back to their boards. This is, or one of the aspects of what they're reporting back to their boards on, and constantly, putting business development strategies, efforts behind how they're expanding their footprint, right? So there are different types of methods that they use to do that, whether it's, a network method, whether it is troops on the ground, as I call it, right? Whether it is tightly partnering with the acquirer, and that's a little bit different in the crypto space, where we don't really talk necessarily. It's a more peer to peer, or that's where we're headed, but also different strategies to kind of move and track the footprint over time. So just a little bit about how bigger companies or issuers or payment vehicles are trying to expand acceptance via a footprint.
Perfect.
And I
Thank
think
you.
all the factors that are influencing, and I think we're talking about a merchant here. So primarily we're talking about brick or mortar retail or e-commerce type of players, right? So like I said, my specialty was kind of like on the buyer supplier side. So, or for commercial acceptance, which are still writing checks even globally, right? So it's not a peer-to-peer network in commercial, but um, but there's still an acceptance component that goes to with any kind of digital transactions, and a lot of that is awareness, right? The marketing and the networking that goes behind that. That there's demand, and I think a lot of these factors are very regional and in-country specific, right? Where it's hard to kind of globalize a lot of these, but of course, transaction cost, security, ease of integration, which we already talked about, or we talked about ease of use, kind of from the consumer perspective. Is that part of my business strategy, which I'll hold off with, and like volatility that's in the market, right? So a lot of things that are a lot of factors that go into it, but I still think in terms of acceptance, is it's very regional, in country, regional at least, of your strategy to grow your footprint.
Awesome, awesome. Leroy or Ryan, do you have anything you want to add to that before we move on? Or anybody else who wants to ask a question before we move
I
on?
mean, all the web shops that I've built in the last 20 years, most people just resort to PayPal, stuff like MasterCard. In the Netherlands, we have Ideal, which is like an integrated cash app, which you can integrate in your web shop. I think everyone goes to those because they're not only default, but they're safe. They're big parties. Everyone knows they work. They're easy to integrate. Usually just a matter of putting an HTML form in your website. So it's clear. You know, if you want to use that, it works. And I think what I've noticed with people in terms of crypto, accepting crypto payment, is it's still it's still a niche. It's a lot of technical people mostly using crypto in the first place, other than people using it just for trading purposes. Um, but if I were like a technically inept merchant that wanted to set up a web shop online, if I were to enable cryptocurrency payments right now, I wouldn't even know where to start. And in the last couple of years, there's been a big move from big parties like PayPal and some other payment providers that actually do enable payment in crypto for various currencies. But they're still pretty tucked away. It's still not known to the masses, it seems. People are still aren't aware that it's possible. Most of the times I tell them about it.
Yeah, I think I've had that reaction for people as well, Leroy, when, it's like, well, what can you use it for? It's like, well, you can buy, depending on who takes it, you can buy stuff with it. And they're kind of like, wait, you can actually do that. And yeah, I think this is a combination of factors, and we'll talk about that a little bit of some of the factors of adoption. But one thing I want to just highlight before we move on that you stated that I think is really kind of an important aspect for us to think about as we just go about, back after this into our conversations and a broader sense is when you said, people want to use those big players because they feel safe with that. And I think that really falls under that legal and regulatory compliance that, merchants, it's hard to have your own business. It's hard to take your own, to take payments. It's not, and especially like Patrick was saying, regionally, depending on where you are, it's not necessarily a simple thing. And having that legal and regulatory compliance aspect of it is definitely something that we all need to really be paying attention to in a deeper level too, as we say, like, hey, everybody take DigiByte or everybody take crypto. What does that mean? For that merchant's responsibility. That's
Here in the
an important
States,
level.
right? It's like a lot of small businesses are not taking Venmo anymore, right? They're going back to their not even any kind of digital payments because 2 years ago they started to require a 1099K, right? Which was like any digital transaction, or if I made what $6,000 more in digital transactions, I was issued, and people were like, "Oh, that's another regulatory compliance. Like I have to either issue that or I have to report that, right? Or especially issue that." And it was just overhead that you actually saw just small vendors not even taking Venmo and cash payments anymore or Cash App payments anymore because there was an extra layer of regulatory compliance that they just did not want to deal with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, okay. That gives us a lot to chew on as we move forward.
And also
Um,
in the legal context, I mean, if I've worked with various implementations in the past, and if some were easier than others, some were hard even. And if you had one of these hard ones that were new or obscure, or they just renewed their platform, there's always an entity to fall back on in terms of support. I mean, you're paying for it in the end. You're always reliant on a third party, but you have support, and I think that's what makes merchants feel safe. They know if they go for a certain payment provider in terms of payments, they can be assured that the payments will work and that they have legal support, technical support even.
yeah, that's an excellent point.
That's the
Excellent
big
point.
fear of crypto. It's like, yeah, when you use crypto, you're basically on your own. There's
Yeah,
no
that's
in terms of decentralization. That's a good thing. You're cutting the middleman. You're cutting the banks. You're cutting the big parties. You're actually doing peer-to-peer payments, but you're completely on your own. And I think that's still scary for some people.
For sure. Absolutely. Which is understandable, right? Especially it's not just like crypto has a lot of nuanced feelings about it. So it's a scary area in general for merchants, I would think. So let's talk a little bit about, the point of sale system. I really liked Patrick came up with this as the central nervous system of the business. I think that's a really good visual for what a point of sale system is. Um, you know, overseeing those sales operations uh, and automating that. We can maybe Leroy can also talk about that automation process a little bit throughout this, but so you can see, we've got we interact with point of sale systems every day of our lives, whether we're going to the grocery store, whether we're buying decorations online, whatever we happen to do. And you've got so many different choices. And this is where, when we first started talking about this discussion, we decided to keep this really high level because it was really easy to try to break down all of those different ones and get kind of in the weeds about that, like in and of itself. So we're just keeping this just high level, just highlighting basically the different systems and the gateways, right? That we have to use to participate um, at a payment level, and we'll talk a little bit about, you know, how if you're using a crypto point of sale system, what are some things you have to think about in order to choose the right one for you? Not that there's like a ton to choose from at this moment, to be honest, but there are different options. So, Patrick, I'll let you go a little bit deeper on that.
I mean, I'm probably no specialist on actually point of sale systems, but they are just they are the terminal, right? They used to be called terminals back in the day of where you would actually initiate a transaction, right? So these are card readers, these are phones now, and I think there's hardware aspects, there's middleware aspects, and there's hardware aspects of it, but there's always some sort of, or an even firmware aspect to this, where I think e-commerce is one thing, right? Where especially for the traditional type of things, where that's just putting a little bit, embedding some code in your website, or hooking it something up, right? So, but I think that in terms of the hardware that's involved, there's always some little hardware that's involved for some of this stuff. And I think a lot of, the universe, how universal the point of sale is, how much overhead there is to maintain that, is all kinds of things that go into. I jumped ahead a little bit, but why people, or what would be some of the barriers to acceptance. So, Leroy, you're much more versed on this, especially from the e-commerce side. So I'll let you know if you have anything else to add.
Nothing to add on that matter, man. Damn, everything you said is correct. So
Yeah, this one's kind of it's just a reference sheet, but yeah, there's this in it. Like I said, we could do an entire thing to go in depth of just this idea of the different
yeah,
point of sale
I think one
systems.
thing, one addition is in terms of the traditional terminals. I mean, we call them pin terminals in the Netherlands. It's like the little machines that you hold your card or your smartwatch to, and you pay something. Um, but those are really expensive here in Europe. I think
Yes.
typical merchant pays, I think it's 800 euros a year just to have one pin terminal in a store physically. And there's also maintenance contracts involved. You have to pay 800 euros a year just to use the terminal, and to get a new terminal every 2 or 3 years. But also in terms of technical hiccups, sometimes we've seen it a lot, especially in the last years. And it's like downages or nodes being down. A pin terminal just doesn't work anymore. Then you have to call the pin terminal manufacturer for some reset code. It's really old fashioned, and think that's another reason why more people are moving online with stuff like this. It's cheaper. It's less maintenance.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'll say one thing I've noticed too is like when I go to check out a lot of times now where there used to be a terminal, like a physical terminal, like you're saying they're taking it online. They're using just, they have just like an iPad in their app and you're just interacting with their app. And so there's not even a hardware. I mean, the iPad is the hardware, but there's not an actual terminal itself. So I think that's like nature finds a way kind of situation where, innovation will go into that less friction area as we move forward. So good points raised though, for sure.
They do,
All
but they still
right.
have that hardware, that reader, right? They still have the
Yeah.
reader, and it has to be able, that reader is what they're charging, that's the terminal right there. That reader has to be able to accept multiple types of rails and payments, right? And I think right now it's got the traditional stuff, but that for at least small businesses, that becomes, for your big box retailers and the big stores, but if you're just like, have a shop down the street that you want to set up something, it does, I think it's still expensive or somewhat expensive. It's a barrier to use for, any type of acceptance play because of the hardware and the maintenance and the cost that goes along with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it can get
And
ridiculous,
and
especially if you want to support both MasterCard, both Visa, smartwatches, that kind
Yes, all of it. Yeah.
that's a good
It'd be great
point,
if
the
you could
harder you
just like,
get.
it'd be great if it was just a menu and every time there's a new payment method that you want to accept, you could just, hey, enable this payment method, but it's a little bit, I think it's more complex than that.
what I've seen a lot lately is, especially the smaller merchants are using some sort of a USB device that they can plug in their phone. It's like a mini terminal. They
Yeah,
are
that's what I was referring to.
still, you're still paying a subscription. You're still paying
Yeah.
for the rental of the device, which is a couple €100 or dollars usually. And I think especially for smaller merchants, it's a big chunk out of their income.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that, when we move into our challenges, I think we've kind of like salt and peppered our challenges through this discussion already, but when we laid out here, we notice that we've got, the cost as one of those things that can be a real challenge for adoption. And when we talk about adoption, we can have all the merchants adopting it um world, but if crypto itself isn't really adopted, it doesn't really matter. It's such a symbiotic relationship. So, they, like we're saying, they're not mutually exclusive and kind of have to grow, if you will, grow up together, and there's a lot of barriers to that, right? There's a lot of barriers to even understanding what is cryptocurrency and then transitioning that all the way up to how can I use it to, go to the movies, pay a bill, or you know what I mean? That's it's a wide spectrum to go from that education cycle. And I thought this graphic that Patrick found was really good that kind of lays out um, factors that slow the adoption rates. Like we were saying, lack of merchant acceptance. Well, there's a lot of reasons why merchants are struggling to have that acceptance. Risks and security concerns. I mean, crypto in general, just psychologically in the news, you hear of a hack or a rug pull or this or that all the time, which I think is another factor. And Leroy, you could probably really give some insight on that. On psychologically, what does that do to a merchant that, maybe is interested in accepting crypto, but maybe has that concern that they're delving into an area that's uh, a little bit hostile, right? And then difficult to use. This has been kind of that same theme throughout what we've been talking about is if it's not easy to use, it's just not going to be used. Um, but we've got the price volatility as well. So you might be able to accept something, but if that can do a 20% swing in a day, like what does that mean for that merchant, right? Um, we're talked about this already, but that regulatory uncertainty, um, it's still an issue with almost all countries, really, until we have some clearer rules, right? Security concerns that, like we were saying, what exposure are they giving themselves to add this as a payment option? So, accounting and taxation kind of goes back with that regulatory, but it's something to think about if it's not, like Leroy was saying, kind of those big boys that you're like, okay, well, they've been already doing this with mass adoption levels. They already know the rules. You make it easier for you to use it. I know that's true. I'll say that's true for the Alliance when we had to pick, what we were using to accept crypto. I mean, finding a company that would, guide us through that was really important. So there's lack of awareness. I don't remember the last time I looked. I think we're at like around 3 or 5% of the world knows really about crypto in general. Most people still don't. So we're still fairly early in that way.
Sorry, Laura.
And
It was
yeah,
sorry,
go
Laura.
ahead.
It was 3% of the people of the earth knows about the crypto and how it works and knows about the technology of blockchain. So it's
Okay, so
actually
it's lower,
the lack
lower.
of awareness. Yes, I totally agree with you. The lack of awareness is spread on earth. So people actually should be more thoughtful and educate more and study more and spend their time on reading and what is the technology of blockchain. Sorry, Laura, for interrupting you. Sorry.
No,
Go
no,
ahead.
thank you for correcting me. So it's a
Was
little
that
easier
measured
than
in
I
a
thought.
bull or bear market? I'm wondering.
Laura,
Ooh,
you're
that's a good
amazing.
question.
No, but
Leroy
it's
is amazing.
a couple of years we have a cycle. We're in a bull market all of a sudden. And what I've noticed is, and I mean, I work in IT, and it's like most people in IT are somehow involved in crypto one way or the other. But I've noticed
Actually,
during a bull market, even if you, I mean, I regularly go to the gym. I have some CrossFit groups. I have some parenting groups for my kids at school. And during a bull market, like everyone talks about crypto all of a sudden. It's like the whole world knows about crypto. And right now we've
actually,
been in a bear market, and nobody talks about it anymore. Other
it
than us.
has it has, I think, a lot of psychological aspect on different people. Some people, as you said, they want to be involved in the bull run. Some people scared of being involved, and some people are actually involved, which is almost 3% of the people.
Yeah, that's a really good point though that you brought up, Leroy. And I'll add on to that. Like you said, right now nobody talks about it. Nobody's like, oh, we're dying to use it. But during, when the price is going up, all of a sudden everybody's like, rushing to try to figure this out because this must be the thing, right? And when Val and I actually ran a meetup together in Wilmington, North Carolina, and you could really gauge your attendance 100% by the price of what Bitcoin was doing. Like if
Exactly.
Bitcoin was going
Almost
high, we
surprised in
we
that.
could triple, yeah, we would triple attendance that week, and so that's a really good. I think that's also a really good point that to factor in is actually, and this could even go back into that acceptance discussion. It's like, whether we like it or not, I mean, that is a very large factor in how much this is going to grow and how much awareness really it gets. So that's a good point. Patrick, is there anything
And I
else you want to
Even
add?
people,
Oh, go ahead.
I mean, even if people originally just care about price, I mean, they're interested in one way or the other, and even if those people will stick around for the technology later on, that's a good thing. And
Yeah, no,
what
I
I've
agree.
crypto still has some sort of a stigma to it. I mean, every once in a while you read about these big hacks, millions of dollars worth of Ethereum or Bitcoin gets stolen, and they're like horror stories. Um, I mean, sure, yeah, you're technically you're always at risk, but it's no different with a regular bank account, with a regular phone app like I do from the bank. It's really not hard to scam someone nowadays, whether it's crypto or a regular bank app. But for some reason, crypto still has this big stigma around it that it's unsafe some way, one way or the other.
Yeah, no, and well, and we see it. I mean, I honestly I've become kind of desensitized to it, but um But, there's never a day that you don't see something uh, going on either in the courts or, like you said, with hacks. So it doesn't help. It doesn't help the challenge to have that stigma. But I think the more we can use it as a real tool, I think just the weaker that other stigma becomes. So, which is exactly why we're doing what we're doing today. Um, Patrick, did you want to add anything to that before I move on to the next one?
Well, I think as we talk about we kind of shift back and forth from the consumer, but from the merchant perspective, right? As I think when you're a merchant, if you're if you're big like an Amazon, let's say, or if you're a mom and pop, and there is a spectrum and sectors all in between, but you really have to manage your cash, right? Cash is king. And I think, and especially for the merchants, they're very focused on their cash flow, right? And I think in the bigger companies, they call it treasury management, right? But understanding what that liquidity is. And I think that there's kind of especially for from a merchant acceptance of crypto is, yes, I can accept it, but then, hey, can I pay my vendors with crypto, right? That really becomes a very decentralized and kind of peer-to-peer network, right? So if I'm able to accept, but then I can turn that, or then I can pay my vendors with an accepted form of crypto, that's the win-win because it really eliminates the middleman. But I think where we are right now, and even in other digital forms of payment, is that cash is king. Even for the big companies to the small companies, they've got to balance or manage their balance sheet. And I think where crypto acceptance comes in, if you are accepting crypto and you are in a region or a market where it's more accepted, is how the merchants are managing their cash and their liquidity when it comes to crypto. Because if I don't have anybody that I have to pay in crypto, my suppliers in crypto, then I need to turn that into fiat or cash, which becomes a little bit extra steps. And I think managing kind of like the cash flow for merchants is a concern. It's a concern for businesses no matter, but when you start incorporating other types of payment methods, it makes it even more complex, especially for kind of like the smaller merchants.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah,
The fact that
we
you
have to,
can't
yeah,
turn it around.
especially in a
Go ahead,
business
Leroy.
context, you have, I mean, you always have to offer various payment methods. If you have like 1,000 orders coming in a day, you'll want to offer sufficient payment methods for people to pay for those orders. And if you just offer one payment method for a crypto that not many people know about, yeah, you're going to miss a lot of money for
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, for now. I like that option. For now. For now.
For now.
Um,
But I think that's part of it is for me, if I was sure it incorporates inclusion, right? I can accept more theoretically, right? More people can pay for my goods and services in theory, but then I have to be able to manage that on my books to from an operational standpoint to run my business, meaning paying who my debtors and who I owe and my suppliers.
well, and I think that's a good segue into the benefits because we were having this
Yeah.
discussion earlier today, Patrick and I were, and when we were talking about the liquidity issue, and I said, I in an ideal world, right? In an ideal world, if let's say I'm a math tutor, I accept uh, I accept DigiByte for my hours, and then if I could, turn around and pay my rent with DigiByte, in a peer-to-peer way, or be able, like you said, to pay your debts in that currency without having to switch out, which I think is the ultimate goal for everybody, generally speaking, who are here for a decentralized currency and not just an investment. So we'll end we'll end this discussion on some high points of accepting crypto. and specifically DigiByte, and I know others have mentioned it as well, but with DigiByte, the the cost is so low. The transaction cost is so low, and the speed is so high. So that in it of itself, is a strong benefit. Um, that global reach and competitive advantage, again, like Patrick was saying, you're accessing a whole nother group of customers if you accept crypto, and like let's say you accept DigiByte. You have people who have this currency and want to be able to participate with the network. So it's almost like a built-in marketing arm that you don't have to pay for. Just accept it, and people will talk about your business because they want to be able to actually use that, which is like a really different. When you think about like regular, you don't see that excitement to be like, I get to pay with US dollars. You know what I mean? So there's that level of benefit to a merchant that they're participating in something quite different in that realm, because for people who are advocates, they're not advocates a lot of times at this level, um, just because they think, the price is going to go up. They actually want to start using it and creating that circular economy. So, from a merchant's perspective, that's something that can't even be bought, with marketing, with a traditional marketing arm. I know
And I
you
think
guys
there's
have a lot to add to that as well.
I
I mean,
think
if you have a digital wallet, that wallet is your own completely. There's no bank involved. There's no third party involved. Your wallet is your wallet.
exactly,
And
exactly.
that's the thing. I mean, yeah, sure, my bank is safe. When I get scammed at an ATM, I mean, there's a lot of ATM scams nowadays where people put some device over your ATM terminal, and card info gets stolen. And in such event, my bank is liable, and they will replenish a certain amount of stolen money should that ever happen. So yeah, it's very safe. In the meantime, my bank card and my bank account cost me, I think, about €100 a year. It's not a lot of money, but still, it costs me money, and it's getting more expensive every year. And another thing, but it doesn't really involve a lot of people, but we've all seen, and I really don't want to dig into some conspiracy alt right wing rabbit hole, but we've seen bank accounts being frozen for having wrong political opinions on some occasions. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize. I mean, if you have a crypto wallet, that wallet is completely your own. Nobody can shut it down. Nobody can block it. Nobody can stop you from transitioning money from one wallet to the other.
As you said, Leroy, you said at the beginning also that you have your own money, you manage your own money. No third party can interfere in your money management. Nobody knows about it also.
Exactly.
And also, uh, I think in the crypto industry, everyone needs everyone's cooperation. It should be a cooperation. Like if a merchant wants to use a platform, so it should be very easy for that merchant to use, or that Oxapay or DigiByte or some platforms that make it easy to use, uh, make it useful for them. The merchants, they actually thinks it's like sending some spacecraft to the space, but it's actually comes from that lack of awareness, that they have no idea that they have the full control of their assets. They have the full control of everything. Nobody can interfere in that. It's amazing point for a person who is living on this earth, it guides, eventually it guides everything through one goal, which is people have the power of everything. If it's my self experience. If I'm wrong in it, I hope you guys correct me in that thing. But I totally agree. Patrick also mentioned that middleman, it goes away. And as Leroy also mentioned, that you have the full management of your money, on your assets and everything.
I mean, I think that's like the very essence of crypto, of Bitcoin in the first place. Like cutting
100%. And I'm glad you. Well, I was going to say, I'm really glad you brought up, without getting political, but I think it's a a solid point is that when businesses can be cut off, you know, and without little warning um, or recourse, frankly, right? The adaptability in this world, I think it's going to be essential for success because it's, you know, so much is changing. Things that we didn't think were possible in a lot of arenas all of a sudden are becoming possibilities, right? So I think that adaptability is really, you know, kind of a key for merchants, depending on, you know, a lot of things, but you know, geographically where they are and what's going on in their areas and their institutions. So um, I think that's a like one of the strongest points. I would say for me personally, uh, one of the reasons why I became interested in cryptocurrency, but real specifically DigiByte because of its speed and its low transaction costs. So, like as a micropayment, as a, you know, a good use case, that really was ultimately what drew me, and the reason that I was drawn to it was the word adaptability. I wanted to become as adaptable as I could um, outside of the existing systems. So, I mean, definitely a lot of work that needs to be done in all of these arenas, but you know, it's not a pie in the sky idea anymore. This you can live, you know, you can live off of crypto. It's not easy, but people are doing it, and yeah, I think that the better we understand the challenges for merchants as consumers and as members of the DigiByte community, I think that the faster, you know, the faster it'll grow. The faster it'll grow for sure. Do you guys want to add anything else to this one?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
As far as the merchants go, now for owning your own keys or your own wallet or however you want to phrase it, for the individual that's perfect. But when you start getting into merchants, you have local, district, divisional, regional, corporate. All these corporations like to keep stuff in house and control it so deep. But to put it on all of those levels and still maintain some control without individual stores owning it is difficult to implement. So in order to get some adoption or at least mass adoption, something would have to make that process somewhat easier. For mom and pop merchants, it's simple. But when you start talking like Apple, Google, Amazon, it gets more complicated and muddied down. So as far as owning your own keys, it's not as simple as just one company owning one key to every store.
That's a good point. And Patrick, you were talking about this actually before. Maybe you can expand on that. With, you know, like Amazon and some of these larger ones exploring, accepting crypto. Like, do you have any thoughts
I
on
think
that?
it's what we were talking about is um, there are multiple there are multiple if you're accepting a form of currency for a good that you're having, right? We talked about kind of the traditional players of Square, well, MasterCard, Visa, and all of these, but that are all four-party systems ultimately, three or four-party systems, right? And I think from the merchant perspective is that, hey, we can talk about owning our own, you know, having control over our wallets and everything like that, and especially from the payment aspect, right? The issuing aspect, but for the merchants that are they want this handled for themselves, and if it's going to be a certain acceptance, like they're going to accept something, I don't think that they want any additional overhead in terms of how they interact, and they don't think they want to take on any kind of legal compliance, right? So I think that there's a lot of things that have to happen for that to be more of a seamless experience for the merchant, right? For more widespread adoption.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And, you know, moving on, we're almost finished with this and we can open up for some Q&A for our guests.
People are
But
gonna, I think
what you
maybe
say?
Amazon might. I said Amazon. They kind of go back and forth, but I would just say if they're exploring, they've tried it in a region sometime.
Right, they've tested it somewhere.
Yeah, they're testing.
Um, and I think that's one thing that we can do kind of as a DigiByte community is start really trying to learn which regions are most um, where this adoption is happening the strongest, and really start educating ourselves on why. Why is it happening there? What is the catalyst, and is that something that transcends into other regions as well? And
I
I
say it'd be
liked
Asia Pac. I think it's Asia Pac really is where it's most
really, you think
prevalent.
so?
Oh yeah. I
Um,
don't know. Would anybody disagree with me on that? I just see it a
Now,
lot more.
it's do you why would you think it's more Asia based? Like, what do you think? Not like why do you think that, but like what would be the
Oh, because
factors
I
for?
think I think they bypassed a lot of like the traditional like plastics, right? They went from cash to other types of electronic systems. Um, and I think they kind of bypassed, at least here in the States, right? Kind of the trajectory that we were on, and they went from cash to other kind of digital payments a lot faster. Or that was kind of
Okay, so
like the
they're
jump.
just ahead in the curve. Yeah.
Yeah, well, they just went from they didn't do all their acceptance of these plastics were not there, and then they just kind of went from cash to digital versus we had checks, we had plastic, we had other types of things, and I think as soon as especially with mobile phones came about that they just kind of adopted digital payments a lot faster than we did because we had all these other legacy payment vehicles that existed.
Right. We didn't have to because we had those others. You're right. That's a good point.
I,
And
I
I
agree
like
with
that.
you, but for different reasons. With the sanctions that are currently happening around the world, with current monetary policies and wars and all that stuff that's the catalyst for the sanctions, that would probably be one reason as to why companies or countries would adopt different or alternative forms of payment or technologies to transfer payments to avoid or perhaps bypass sanctions on current monetary policy.
I mean, and I can't argue with that. I think
Well, yes,
that's a
I
fair
agree with that.
point.
Yeah, that's a fair point, which actually sanctions nowadays for, as Patrick said, maybe Asian countries will develop faster, but maybe that's a fine point of that, which sanctions are happening around the world, and it makes it much more easier to access the crypto and the transaction and also the transaction fees, and when these merchants come to know that they how much fee they have to pay, for example, just do your transaction from one side of the country to the other side of the earth, so they definitely will be eager to accept it much more. And yes, it's a fair point of that, which sanctions are actually have a very strong impact on accepting digital currencies.
Bring up a good point about um, cross-border commerce, right? And I think that's something that nobody's really cracked, right? Is and if we could open up, make cross-border transactions a lot easier, um,
Yeah,
it would benefit a lot of different parties involved.
true. That's true.
And that's another advantage of crypto. And of course,
Yeah,
I'm the devil's advocate here, but when I receive a million digibytes, who's going to know about it? I mean, if I receive €1 million on my bank account, my bank has the legal obligation to notify the authorities that I received a large sum of money. If that happens in crypto, who knows? Who cares?
and like the cross-border fees from like anything that's more secure, right? I mean, I don't want to be doing wire transactions all the time, right? But from the merchant perspective, it's like, hey, the ease of use is there with some of these traditional payment methods like the Visa, Mastercards, the Squares, but by the time that they the transaction fees that are associated with it that the merchants get hit with, it's hardly even worth opening up their e-commerce shop to different regions because of the cross-border payment aspect.
And
Well, sanctions aside, you have with sanctions aside, you have, let's say you're transferring from America to China or America to Russia, you're getting taxed in America, then you're getting hit with processing fees through whatever merchant is processing it or credit card company is processing it. Then you're getting taxed again on the back end on the receiving country, and then taxed via the banks with the bank fees on both ends. So, I mean, there's a lot of steps and people with their hands in the cookie jar on both ends.
Yeah.
And that's another reason why accepting cryptocurrencies could be interesting, because right now it's still early in that regard. Like in the Netherlands, there really isn't a lot of legislation when it comes to crypto. Like as a consumer, there's only one measurement moment in a year. That's January 1st, and I'm only obligated to pay taxes over my crypto if my crypto ownings exceed 100,000 euros. But once again, nobody knows how much crypto I really have. It's in my private wallet, so nobody can find out anything in that regard. But I've also had to deal with the European web shops before, and every European country, just like every American state, has their own legislation and own limits and own tax exemptions. And especially for the Netherlands and Belgium, some taxes only get applicable when a certain amount of turnover is achieved. And if you switch to a certain to multiple payment methods, one being crypto, you can stay under that threshold. Could be another big advantage.
Oh, I didn't think about that. That's an interesting point, Leroy. It's a very interesting point, actually. Is, by diversifying your acceptance level, yeah,
Well, for
depending on
now,
how
I
it's
would agree.
reported.
For now,
Yeah.
I would agree until legislation passes, at which point then you become a criminal for money laundering.
Well,
Yeah,
it'll
because
be
it didn't go
interesting
through
how they
any
handle it. Yeah.
regulatory regulated intermediary.
I wonder what again, when it's one thing when you accept crypto payment, if you don't need to cash it out, that's one thing. But I think that's where it's really interesting to watch the legislation that's going on with the different exchanges as well at the exchange level, because most will, we're not at a place where, a merchant's going to be like, I'll only accept crypto and I'll never cash it out. I'm just going to pay all my suppliers in crypto. It's just not there yet. If there is a case study of that, it's a small, it's a small one. So, but it is, I think, some fascinating points were brought up, especially at the place we are in this adoption curve, right? Um, really thoughtful things that were brought up today. We're just at an hour. I know we try to keep it within the range. This is our last
Well, you
screen
want
of
to go
just
back to the last slide because I just wanted to highlight
sure.
this that
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
I think I think that this is just a good digital acceptance example as we kind of talked about they're very established now, the Square or Block or whatever they call themselves. But um they did I mean, at least here in the States, they did a big campaign around this to kind of encourage because it was really we had the Square app and we thought that was cool from a peer-to-peer transaction, but it was like they wanted to kind of expand that network behind, hey, I'm paying my friend for half of the drinks we had last week, right? But they were really trying to how do we get this as an accepted form of payment? And I think there's two lessons here. So they kind of did this, they ate the cost to do this, but I think that they really honed in on a specific market. And I don't know about the geography, but they honed in on a specific market where they really targeted what we would call freelancers or, small mom and pops, right? As part of kind of this campaign. And now you see those block readers, at least here in the States, on, a lot has empowered a lot of people or independent business owners to be able to easily accept and transact and have visibility into kind of some of the data that they need to do their reporting. So that's just my take on that.
That's a good point. And I really,
But it's a
I like the
great of awareness and marketing behind it.
right. Right. It was 100%. And you're right. Like I remember the first time I saw one of those squares readers, I was at the farmer's market and it was notorious the farmer's market only took cash, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it was like one farmer took, started taking credit cards because they had the square, and then like within a week they all had it, right? So um yeah, the awareness aspect of that for the small merchants is key for sure. And this is just a breakdown of, really what we talked about, just on one slide. But does anybody have any questions they have for our speakers today that hasn't been covered, or anything else that you can think of that we haven't had a chance to discuss? Now is the time.
I just had a practical question when it comes to like buying things online. Like right now, when you have like American Express or MasterCard and you buy something and you never receive it from the merchant, you have a third party to regulate the disputes. But with crypto, you're sending from one wallet to another. So I think that could be a hindrance for people, both merchants and consumers, from using it. Is there any ideas on how to resolve these type of issues?
I would presume a reputation-based model. So stuff like a rating system or a review system. So to see which merchants are reliable in the first place. I mean, if you're buying online, especially from consumer to consumer, from marketplaces like Amazon and such, you're always at risk of not receiving your products. Um, but yeah, usually the merchants with higher reviews, which are more reputable, they're trustworthy, or you can assume they are trustworthy.
My thoughts
I
on
think
that
that
would
that. Oh, go for it.
my thoughts on the review system would be, how would you implement that if it's going to be through a third party? Well, then you're putting that reputation in a third party's hands. And take the government agencies, for example, and any government, doesn't really matter, that provide ratings or reputation based. They're a central point of authority and could be biased. So how would you overcome that that roadblock?
You would always need a third party for that in the first place, because stuff like that just can't be stored on chain yet. I mean, I think I think Digi assets might be used for stuff like that also. There are means to technically implement a system like that. It just isn't there yet. And I think for now, the only thing we can rely on in that regard is using a third party or a platform, stuff like what I'm building, DGBcommerce or Oxapay, which keeps track of which merchants are reputable. Maybe in the future we can use stuff like Digi assets for it.
I totally agree with that, Leroy, because accepting cryptocurrency by amazing companies, big companies like Amazon and the others is actually great and amazing. But for now, as you said, we can concentrate also on making it easy for access for merchants, as you said, with DigiByte and um, Oxopay also have some tools which both together are making it actually first easy, accessible. It should be, I think, step by step, because that's another, I think, where it has a very deep um, study. It requires a very deep study for accepting cryptocurrency by big companies. But right now, I think being together and cooperating together and let those merchants and businessmen understand how to use these terms and how to use DigiByte or how to use the tools of Oxapay. Like we have payment links, which you can easily transfer anything, which you can everybody can transfer you anything, or you can get some. If you have application like Telegram or you want to sell or buy anything, you can easily use it. So there are some tools which actually make it for consumers easier, and it makes them eager to work with crypto. Actually, maybe as you said, so many people, when you say crypto, they think about bull run, but crypto is not about bull run or bear run or something like that. It's first about that we have to manage our own money and assets, as you said, Leroy. So accepting by big companies, I think it requires a very, very strong and ideal development. And also, first, we have to concentrate on business merchants need to accept us more and more than before. And that's a good part about it, because when businessmen accept it, then big companies definitely comes ahead. Or before they accept it, they already have come ahead, you know? So um, making these apps, these everything, all protocols and platforms, making it useful for this community, that's, I think it's going to be more helpful in future than thinking that are they going to accept on their stock or not, because I think it requires a very deep knowledge, and I myself, I'm learning everything every day. So but using and cooperating, using those tools will make it makes them understand what is actually crypto is, you know?
And I have a quick thought. Instead of targeting merchants, because merchants at the moment use payment processors, would it not be a better avenue to target payment processors to accept or use blockchain technology and then have merchants come on later as a way to self custody and manage their own instead of relying on a payment processor?
Well,
I'll
as
I'll take I'll take that.
yes, Laura, go ahead.
It's a good point. And we have different people in DigiByte have approached the different, different payment processors, especially like the big ones, that are like the most widely used. But it's not quite so simple where they're like, oh yeah, come on. I thought it would be a simple sell like thing for you know a third party processor to accept DigiByte because it shares the same source code as Bitcoin and everybody accepts Bitcoin, right? So I was like, well, this will be, easy. Just explain that to them and give them the integration guide. It's not that simple. I mean, I don't think it's wrong to still try to to get it in the conversation, but in the crypto industry, how decisions are made, what's integrated and why and when and how. Um, it's those are not simple, necessarily even logical, decisions that are being made, and most of them, it's pretty opaque on how those decisions are made. So, I think we don't have to be exclusionary in our pursuits to be like, let's just look at this or let's just look at that. I think that we can kind of all, you know, delve into our own experiences, our own expertise, kind of like what Leroy is doing with DGBcommerce was, he drew from his own expertise and as a member of the DigiByte community and said, this is what I want to focus on, because this is the skill set I have, right? Versus there might be somebody who uh, is more well connected that wants to focus on getting, DigiByte accepted at BitPay, so I think it doesn't have to be exclusionary, if that makes sense, but I mean, I think it's a fair point, but, I think, a multi-prong approach probably be the most effective.
You need to start small.
Yeah,
The thing
yeah.
is, of course, you need to target the whole world eventually. But the reason I targeted merchants is because I'm familiar in the area. I've made many web shops before. And in regards to getting payment providers to accept DigiByte, I mean, not to get too technical, the implementation process is almost the same for Bitcoin. I've also done it myself in the last couple of weeks. It's almost the same with some minor changes. But in order to do this, you need to run your DigiByte node, which costs money, and it all comes down to money in the end. So for a payment provider to accept a certain currency such as DigiByte, there needs to be enough liquidity for them to actually make profit of it. Because running a node costs money. You need the node for stuff like that.
That's an excellent point. That's a really excellent point. And, like you said, to start small. I mean, right now, you're paying out of pocket for your node. I think, those early those early adopters that are, or the early supporters that are doing that, are doing that for kind of the love of the purpose, not necessarily the love of the profit. So you're going to get a total spectrum on that for sure. Thank you for raising that point about the note. I forgot to add that in here. Well, we're getting right up at little 15 past the hour, and we'll probably wrap it up. Are there any other last questions? Really good points made today, by the way. Good questions so far. But is there anybody else that hasn't had a chance to ask that is still wanting? Okay. Well, I just want to say thank you so much, to Patrick, to Leroy, to Ryan for coming in and sharing your perspectives. We got a lot of work to do, a long road ahead. And Leroy, I know you had talked about doing an AMA for DGBcommerce. Do you have one plan that you want to announce here, or are you still working on that?
Not yet. I have a vacation coming up,
Okay.
so I hope to have something tangible ready before I go on vacation for a week. But
Okay.
yeah, it's definitely going to be before the end of the year.
Okay, cool. I just want to make sure we didn't miss that if you had that already set it up. So we'll keep
Nope.
an eye out for that. Looking
I'm
forward to
still
learning
building,
more.
so I'm doing everything on my
What'd
own.
you say?
I'm still building at the moment, so I'm doing everything on my own at the moment. So
Well,
just
no rush.
it's ready.
Slow is fast in this industry. Build it slow and solid. That's the way to do it. But we'll definitely be keeping an eye out for that as well. And again, thanks everybody for taking the time to come today, to participate, to listen. And we'll do this again next month. I think we're talking about the topic for next month to be open source in general. We've been connecting with more open source communities, not necessarily even blockchain centric. So we'll have more details on that, but the presentation and the video will be in the resources channel. So if anybody wants to go back and use it, if you have any suggestions for us, just feel free to direct message me. But again, thank you everybody for being here. Leroy, hope we didn't keep you up too late. I know it's getting pretty late over there.
Oh, no, it's still early.
So, okay. All right. And if I don't talk to you before then, have a good vacation.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
weekend, everybody.
Yes. Thank you. It was great. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. To Ryan. Thank you.